For 28 years, the sand on Gilgo Beach hid a truth no one wanted to face. A truth scattered in bones, wrapped in burlap, dumped in the dark. For nearly 3 decades, mothers waited for phone calls that never came. Detectives chased shadows, and killers walked free. But here's the part nobody saw coming. 2 different killers, 2 different timelines. One stretch of lonely highway. And for 28 years, nobody connected the dots. Tonight, we break it open. Why did this case stay cold for so long? What went wrong? And what suddenly changed in 2023, 2024, and now, 2025, that finally shattered the silence? This is the Gilgo Beach investigation, stripped to the bone. No myths, no theories, just the truth. On December 11, 2010, Suffolk County Police were not looking for a killer. They were looking for one woman, Shannon Gilbert, 24, a young escort who ran into the marsh after a terrifying 911 call. Officers searched the brush along Ocean Parkway, but instead of finding Shannon, they found a skull, then another, for bodies in burlap sacks, lined neatly along the sand, as if someone had arranged them like pieces. Everything stopped. Patrol cars, reporters, fire marshals, investigators, all staring at a crime scene that didn't make sense. Who the hell uses one of the busiest roads on Long Island as a dumping ground? The next days answered nothing. Instead, exposed the scale. 11 bodies, 11 stories cut short, 11 families with no answers. Some victims had been missing since the late 1990s. Others vanished around 2007, 2009, 2010. And suddenly detectives realized this wasn't one crime scene. This was a graveyard. But the question everyone kept whispering, why didn't anyone find them sooner? Because what happened here wasn't just murder. It was a perfect storm of police failures, hidden corruption, misread clues, and killers who counted on that silence. Stay with me, because once you see what went wrong, you'll understand why this case stayed cold for almost 30 years. The Gilgo Beach killings didn't go unsolved because the killer was smart. They went unsolved because the system cracked. Suffolk County Police should have called the FBI on day one. That's standard procedure for serial or multi-victim cases. But the chief at the time, James Burke, blocked the FBI from touching the case. Not because of strategy, not because of jurisdiction, but because he was hiding his own corruption. Court documents later exposed that Burke was involved in criminal activity, including beating a handcuffed suspect, inviting the FBI, and would expose everything. So the case became a local investigation, run by a department fighting its own internal battles, while the victims waited in the sand. Victims from the late 1990s shared clear signatures, similar dismemberment, similar disposal locations, same stretch of highway, but no one connected Peaches, 1997, to Baby Doe, to the torso found years later. Not because it wasn't obvious, but because the evidence was scattered through years of reports handled by different teams. Fragmented, misfiled, pieces everywhere. Just never in the same room. Ocean Parkway is long isolated, choked with tall grass, marsh, and sand. If you know the area, you know how invisible a body can become, especially when storms move debris. Tide shifts sand. Brush grows over remains. Killers didn't need brilliance. They needed time, and they had plenty of it. Locals didn't trust the police. Victims' families said calls weren't returned. Witnesses said tips were ignored. And when the first sets of remains were found, the department made a critical mistake. They immediately suggested these cases may not be connected. That statement created confusion that lasted years. In 1997, DNA was primitive. You couldn't build family trees, identify relatives, or matched decades-old remains. If the Gilgo killings happened today, many of the victims would have been identified within months. But back then, all police had were bones and hope. But here's the twist. Even with all these failures, the killer almost slipped away forever, until one mistake changed everything. A slice of pizza, a single strand of hair, and a digital trail no one expected. What happened next reshaped the entire case. We're entering the turning point. The case had gone cold so many times that investigators quietly stopped believing an arrest would ever come. Files were passed between detectives like inherited burdens. Families waited through birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries. Their daughter's name spoken only in courtrooms and news cycles that never lasted long enough. But in 2022, something changed. A new team stepped into the Suffolk County Police Department. A different commissioner, different chief, and a renewed mandate. Rebuild public trust and reopen the investigation from scratch. Their first move was simple, almost obvious. Put every piece of evidence on the table. Again, this time, nothing was dismissed as noise. Nothing was probably nothing. Nothing was considered too small. And buried inside the old files, they found it. A forgotten record. A detail that had been noted, but never connected. A cell phone ping from a burner phone used to contact the victims. And a geographic pattern that kept pointing to the same neighborhood. Not the whole region. Not the whole county. A cluster of just a few blocks in Massapequa Park. A quiet street. An ordinary home. And a man whose name had never once appeared on any suspect list. At least not officially. A new analyst started digging, cross-referencing phone data with old witness reports, traffic camera logs, and something most investigators had long ignored. The height and build of a man seen by multiple witnesses at the victim's meeting points. When everything was layered together, the phone records, the witness accounts, the travel routes, and the odd pattern of calls made near his home, one name rose to the top. Rex Heuermann, an architect, a father, a man who looked like he belonged nowhere near a murder investigation, and yet everything kept circling back to him. But the investigators held their breath. A name wasn't enough. They needed evidence, real evidence, not another dead end. So they watched him, silently, patiently, for months. They followed his car. They mapped his movements. They studied the old crime scenes with new technology. And when they finally collected a discarded pizza crust and ran DNA tests on the hair found on one of the victims, the results hit like a hammer. It was a match. 28 years after the first woman vanished, the first real break in the case had arrived. But the investigators didn't celebrate. They barely reacted because they knew the truth. A break isn't the same as a conviction. A match isn't the same as a confession. And a suspect isn't the same as a killer. Not yet. If Rex Heuermann was the man behind the Gilgo Beach murders, then one question rose above all others. How did he stay invisible for nearly 3 decades? The next layer of the investigation would expose decisions, failures, and blind spots that allowed a killer, if he is a killer, to walk free for years. When the name Rex Heuermann surfaced inside the task force, investigators did what the public later struggled to do. They looked past the ordinary. They dug into his daily routines, the anonymity of his profession, the quiet of his neighborhood. What they found wasn't the image of a cinematic killer, not a shadowy figure, not a drifter, not a man living on the edge of society. He was, in every visible way, unremarkable. An architect who took the same train into Manhattan every morning. A man who bought coffee at the same shop, walked the same sidewalks, worked late, and returned home without attracting a second glance. But when investigators peeled back his public surface, another picture emerged. One built entirely on verifiable patterns, not theories. What stood out first was the compartmentalization. Heuermann's life seemed divided into 2 parallel tracks. the professional and the private, and they rarely mixed. On paper, he was reliable. At home, distant. In public, quiet. Online, another layer altogether. Phone records revealed burner phones used to contact the victims. Phones that were purchased under false identities but activated in areas close to his home and office. A digital trail hidden in plain sight, unnoticed for years only because no one had lined up the data the right way. Investigators also discovered something else, a pattern of movement. The calls to the victims weren't random. They followed his commute. They followed his work schedule. They followed a man who understood routine and used it as camouflage. It wasn't brilliance. It wasn't luck. It was the oldest trick in the book. Blend into the background and people stop looking. Still, investigators were cautious. Patterns alone won't survive in court. They needed the kind of evidence that could hold under pressure. That's when they turned to forensics. Old evidence was retested. Hair strands, fiber samples, trace materials from the burlap used to wrap the victims. Everything was put through modern analysis. One hair in particular had always stood out, collected from one of the crime scenes. At the time, DNA testing wasn't advanced enough to produce a match. But in 2023, it was. The mitochondrial DNA test linked the hair to Heuermann's family line. Not definitive proof by itself, but one more piece falling into place. And then came the turning point. The moment investigators stopped whispering possible suspect and started preparing for an arrest. During surveillance, Heuermann discarded a pizza box in Manhattan. Detectives retrieved it. A crust inside still held the saliva sample. The lab results matched the male DNA recovered from the burlap binding one of the victims. Not theory, not speculation. A match scientifically established. With DNA, burner phone data, witness accounts, and geographic profiling all converging. The task force moved quickly. Search warrants were executed. His home office, storage units, and electronics were seized. Investigators found hundreds of internet searches tied to missing women, sex workers, and unsolved cases. Again, all real documented evidence. By July 2023, the weight of what they had was enough. The arrest was quiet. No resistance. No chase. No outburst. Just a man in a buttoned shirt, standing silently as detectives placed him in handcuffs. A man who, according to prosecutors, had been living a double life for years. But even with the arrest, another question refused to fade. How did a case this large, this brutal, and this visible remain unsolved for nearly 28 years? What went wrong? Who failed? And how did a system meant to protect people end up blinding itself to the truth? When the arrest of Rex Heuermann was announced, the public asked the question investigators had been wrestling with for years. How does a case like this survive in darkness for nearly 3 decades? To understand that, you have to go back, not to the crime scenes, but to the environment surrounding them. One, jurisdictional chaos. The bodies were found along a stretch of land that sat between multiple agencies. Suffolk County Police, Nassau County Police, New York State Police, local jurisdictions, and the FBI. Territory became a silent barrier. Information didn't flow. Case files stayed siloed. One agency would make progress, while another hesitated. Everyone was looking at the same coastline, not always sharing the same map. 2. Misclassification of victims. Many of the victims were sex workers, historically and documented in numerous investigations. Cases involving vulnerable women were not given the urgency or resources they deserved. Some early reports were brushed off as voluntary disappearances. Leads were allowed to cool. Patterns were missed because the system wasn't built to see them. It wasn't just a policing issue. It was a cultural blind spot, one with a human cost that can never be undone. 3. A killer who hid in routine. If Heuermann is proven guilty in court, his greatest advantage wasn't intelligence. It was invisibility. He lived a life that didn't raise alarms. Steady job, family. No major criminal history. There were no frantic complaints from neighbors, no sudden declines, no obvious warning signs. He blended in. Routine became his disguise. Predictability became his shield. Killers who stand out get caught. Killers who disappear into normalcy slip through cracks. 4. Outdated technology. In the 2000s, the investigative tools simply are not what they are today. Phone records weren't analyzed using modern geolocation techniques. DNA evidence from the burlap couldn't be tested with the precision now available. Digital footprints, today a goldmine of evidence, barely existed as investigative tools. Technology didn't fail the case. Time did. 5. Internal failures. In 2012, the Suffolk County Police Chief, James Burke, instructed the department to push the FBI away from the investigation, a decision later revealed to be tied to his own corruption case. That move stalled progress. The FBI's absence meant losing national-level analytics, profiling, and advanced tech support during crucial years. A single decision created a vacuum that lasted long enough for the trail to grow cold. 6. Fragmented public pressure. The public cared deeply, but the attention came in waves. Each wave faded. Each anniversary passed quietly. Each moment of outrage slowly dissolved into the noise of other stories. Years of silence create layers of dust on a case file. Layers are easy to ignore. 7. The break that finally came. What changed? A new police administration. A new commissioner. A new task force built with one goal: start over. They reconnected with the FBI. They digitized old evidence. They reanalyzed every shred of phone data. They re-interviewed witnesses who had been overlooked. They rechecked DNA with new technology. The moment everything aligned, phones, locations, DNA, timelines, the case finally had a clear path forward. 28 years later, the darkness broke. 8. What comes next? As of today, the case is still active. Victims' families are still waiting. Investigators are still testing evidence. And prosecutors are building a case that must survive every challenge in court. Nothing is official until a verdict is reached. Nothing is final until the full truth is established, legally, publicly, and beyond reasonable doubt. The Gilgo Beach murders exposed more than a killer. They exposed weakness. They exposed denial. They exposed the cost of ignoring the vulnerable. But they also revealed something else. When people demand answers, when investigators refuse to let go, when technology catches up to truth, a case once buried by time can return to the surface. The coastline of Gilgo Beach still looks peaceful. Waves still touch the sand. Birds still move across the sky. But beneath that quiet, the memory remains. A reminder that even in places shaped by beauty, darkness can settle for years, waiting for someone brave enough to turn on the light. If this story held your attention, if it made you question the silence, the gaps, and the years lost, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel and stay with us as we dig into the hidden cases, the forgotten investigations, and the real mysteries that still sit unanswered across the world. Your engagement helps these stories stay alive. Your voice helps the truth keep moving. Like the video, share it, and drop your thoughts and comments. Especially if you believe there's more to the Gilgo Beach case than what we see on the surface. This is real echoes of reality, where the truth refuses to stay buried.